Thank you very much, Wendy, and thanks again to everyone who's participating, all the attendees. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today was the idea of cryptocurrency, and I'm sure that everyone here has heard about them, things like Bitcoin and so forth. I'll talk some more about that. But I also want to talk about the idea that what investment manias has happened before, and one of those was the Tulip mania, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But really what we want to look at is a cryptocurrency, are these things, is it going to be an apple or a tulip? And the tulip is in reference to the very first investment mania that was recorded. We'll also talk about some of the active cryptocurrencies. On January 30th of this year, there were the top 5 were Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, Bitcoin Cash, and Cardano. As of the 28th of November, when I put the slide deck together, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash were still there on the top 5, but Litecoin and Monero came in there. Also, we'll talk about blockchain, and blockchain is inextricably tied to the idea of cryptocurrencies. I'll talk a little bit about that so you can get an overview of what is blockchain and how does it work. I think I'll give you the bottom line right now, and that comes from the former president of the Dutch Central Bank in 2013, who described Bitcoin as worse than tulip mania. At least when you got a tulip, at least then you got a tulip, now you get nothing. And we'll talk about that and look at how that really is going to, how that plays out with some of the investments that are there. So let's talk about the tulip. For everyone who's read or looked at some of these before, I've used the tulip as an example of different investment manias. This is a picture of the Viceroy. It was put up for sale in 1637, the early third of the 17th century. It was offered for sale between 3,000 and 4,200 guilders. That was 10 times what a skilled worker earned, and they were earning maybe 300 to 400 guilders a year, and that was more than enough to for what in the 17th century was a middle class lifestyle. The shock of the tulip mania was fairly considerable. The market collapsed, and the entire network of values was thrown into doubt. And you think, well, that's a pretty dramatic thing to say. Well, it was dramatic because what happened was, in Karl Marx words, when he wrote Das Kapital, and Das Kapital is, it's not the Communist Manifesto. Das Kapital was really an analysis of capitalism in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. And when he did the analysis of it, he said the fisheries, marine, manufacturers, the Dutch were really, they were the economic superpower of the 17th century. Total capital of the Republic, the Dutch Republic, and it was a republic, it wasn't a monarchy at a time, was probably more important than all the rest of Europe put together. When this mania happened, when people started making these crazed investments in tulips, and it was actually tulip futures because you got to buy a bulb, a tulip bulb, again for somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 guilders. You bought a future because you say, well, you'll get the bulb next year after all the planning was done. So there really wasn't a time when you got these tulips delivered. Most of it was being done in futures. People in England, aristocrats, very wealthy investors and bankers at the time looked at this and said, well, this is how we're going to double, triple, quadruple our money. Unfortunately, when someone woke up and said the emperor has no clothes, or in this case the tulip has no clothes, the bottom pretty much fell out of that market, and all those futures the future contracts became valueless. What were some of the other investment manias? And we have a tendency to go through these thinking that many times there is a free lunch. We don't believe that it's really too good to be true. And as I learned a long time ago, even before I went to MBA school, was that if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. The Tulip mania was one of the first recorded ones in the 1630s. Less than 100 years later, there was a South Sea bubble. Now, think about, this is the early 1800s. The U.S., America is still a colony. The world's powers were England, Spain was still fairly powerful, Portugal. And think of what it took to travel to the South Sea. And it took months and months by sail to travel to the South Sea. If you were with Captain Cook, you realized that the people you visited were not very friendly. But all of a sudden, somebody decided that they're going to sell investments, land, in South Sea islands. And of course, these were marvelous looking sheets, marvelously colored with all you can imagine of what the South Sea would be like, and how much nicer it would be living there or investing there than being in Scotland during the wintertime. So people invested in it, and finally it collapsed within a few years because someone finally realized that they were never going to get there. You couldn't hop on a plane and go see your investment. And so this wasn't land that you were ever going to use. You were buying and selling it. 1720, Mississippi. Again, there were lots of land grants that were made in Mississippi. Unfortunately, the Mississippi Company was Spain, France, and England all claimed parts of it. Well, some English investment groups got together and decided they'd sell land. Again, same thing with the South Seas. 1840s, now we're moving up quite a bit. British Railway mania. They were putting railroads throughout Great Britain. This was the beginning of the railroad. This was the Industrial Revolution starting, and people started selling what they thought were going to be rights of way to railroad lines that were going to be built all over England. Unfortunately, most of the land they were trying to sell was already owned by aristocrats or had been given to the king, and no one could really sell it. That happened. That crashed pretty quickly. 1920s, just before the 1929 financial crash, Florida real estate on adjusted for inflation was selling for 2 to 3 times what it's selling for today. And in the 1920s, there were not that many paved roads going into Florida. Again, you could take a train to Florida, but people were buying them only as investments. 1929, worldwide financial crash. We saw that happen. That was, again, based on overvaluing investments. 1980s, the stock bubble in Kuwait, also Japan. There was an economic bubble there. 1987, not that long ago, the stock market crash of 87. It wasn't as bad as 29, but it caused a very great wake-up in the stock market and the investment area. 1995, Barings Bank collapsed. Again, it had over-invested in what we think of today as junk bonds. And then 2000, the dot-com bomb, or the dot bomb for anyone who was in technology at that time. And here in Austin, we founded our company in '98. In 2000, we saw what was happening. The dot-com bomb was crazed. People were going to, people who had just graduated from high school, weren't in college, were working at McDonald's, decided that they were going to become Java programmers and took a course at the community college and came out with a piece of paper that said they were Java programmers and immediately got hired by internet companies in Austin. It